The air was filled with anticipation as British Airways Flight 268 prepared for takeoff at Los Angeles International Airport. The flight, scheduled to head to London Heathrow, carried over 350 passengers and crew members. The Boeing 747-400 sat on the runway, engines rumbling with power, ready to lift into the sky. On board, passengers settled into their seats, buckled up, and some whispered hopeful prayers for a safe journey. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, golden hue over the airport, making the plane appear like a majestic steel bird ready for its long journey. Seconds later, the aircraft began its acceleration down the runway. The engines roared, the fuselage shook, and the plane gathered speed. The runway lights blurred into a continuous streak of illumination, and within moments, the massive aircraft lifted off the ground. The feeling of weightlessness gripped the passengers as they ascended into the sky. The cabin was filled with a mixture of excitement and calm, the familiar hum of engines acting as a comforting background. However, unbeknownst to everyone on board, disaster was about to strike. Shortly after takeoff, an ominous thump echoed from the plane's number 2 engine, followed by a brief vibration. The captain, experienced and composed, noticed the anomaly and calmly checked the instrument panel. What he saw sent a chill down his spine. The engine temperature was soaring, and flames were detected. The plane, now hundreds of feet above the ground, carried a potentially catastrophic fire on board. Panic threatened to creep in, but the captain and first officer remained composed, initiating emergency protocols while informing air traffic control of their situation. Suddenly, a bright orange glow illuminated the night sky, visible even from the cabin windows. Passengers peered out and saw flames bursting from the left wing. Fear and shock gripped their hearts as murmurs of panic spread through the aisles. Flight attendants worked swiftly, reassuring passengers and instructing them to remain calm while they assessed the situation. The smell of burning fuel mixed with the cabin's air, an unsettling reminder that something was terribly wrong. The crew sprang into action, while the pilots desperately tried to stabilize the aircraft. Despite the terrifying situation, the captain made a decision to keep the plane airborne momentarily. Turning back immediately wasn't a safe option given the heavily loaded fuel tanks for the transatlantic flight. The crew hoped that by following emergency procedures, they could control the fire long enough to safely return to the airport. On the ground, emergency response teams were already preparing for a potential disaster, lining up along the runway, ready to respond to the unfolding emergency. In the cockpit, the pilots attempted an engine shutdown to cut off the fire's fuel supply. However, the blaze continued to burn ferociously. It was a fight against time and the elements. Communication with air traffic control remained critical as the pilots outlined their intentions to return to Los Angeles International Airport. The aircraft slowly turned back toward the glowing city lights below, struggling to maintain stability. The fire appeared relentless, a beacon of danger visible from miles away. Inside the cabin, tension mounted. Flight attendants were calm yet determined, providing clear instructions to passengers, ensuring that seatbelts were secured, and preparing for an emergency landing. Despite their professionalism, fear was evident in their eyes. Passengers clung to each other, silently praying for a miracle. Every second felt like an eternity as the crew fought to keep the situation under control. As the aircraft descended, the flames continued to rage, creating an intense heat that threatened to compromise the plane's structural integrity. The captain knew they had to act swiftly. With precision and skill, he lined up the plane for an emergency landing, maintaining constant communication with the ground crews. Firefighters and paramedics stood by, ready for immediate action as the burning aircraft approached the runway. The landing was one of sheer bravery and determination. With flames trailing from the engine, the Boeing 747 touched down on the runway. The tires screeched, smoke billowed, and the aircraft raced along the tarmac. Emergency brakes engaged, and the plane gradually slowed, coming to a stop in the center of the runway. Ground crews rushed forward, fire trucks spraying torrents of foam and water onto the burning engine in a desperate attempt to extinguish the flames. Inside the cabin, passengers erupted into a mix of relief and continued fear as they awaited instructions. The captain's voice echoed through the speakers, firm and reassuring as he ordered an emergency evacuation. Doors were flung open, slides deployed, and passengers began sliding to safety, flight attendants guiding them through the process. Smoke filled the cabin, adding urgency to the evacuation, but the crew remained calm and focused, determined to save every life on board. As the last passenger made it down the slide, the flames were finally brought under control. The burning engine was a charred mess of metal and destruction, but the passengers and crew were safe on the tarmac. Emergency responders worked tirelessly, tending to minor injuries and providing comfort to those shaken by the experience. In the aftermath, the story of British Airways Flight 268 became one of courage, resilience, and the extraordinary skill of the flight crew. They had faced a nightmare scenario, an engine bursting into flames seconds after takeoff, yet they had brought everyone home alive. For the passengers, the experience was harrowing, a reminder of life's fragility and the thin line between disaster and survival. For the crew, it was a testament to their training, professionalism, and unyielding dedication to the safety of every person on board. A cool morning in Los Angeles promised a routine flight for the passengers of British Airways Flight 268. The Boeing 747, a magnificent bird of steel and power, stood at LAX, ready to take off for its journey across the Atlantic to London Heathrow. The atmosphere inside was relaxed. Passengers settled into their seats, flight attendants prepared for the long journey, and the cockpit crew ran through their final pre-flight checks. However, within minutes of takeoff, what started as a normal day would turn into a harrowing ordeal. The engines roared to life and the giant aircraft thundered down the runway, lifting gracefully into the clear sky. The power of the four engines was palpable as they climbed higher, the ground quickly shrinking below. But as the plane ascended, an uneasy rumble caught the attention of the crew. It was subtle at first, like the distant murmur of thunder, but within seconds it grew louder and more violent. In the cockpit, warning lights flashed ominously, alerting the pilots to a critical issue in engine number 2. Before they could comprehend the severity of the problem, a deafening explosion shattered the calm. Passengers on the right side of the plane were thrown into a state of panic as flames burst from the wing. Smoke billowed in thick black plumes, and the smell of burning fuel permeated the cabin. Screams and cries filled the air as the once serene flight transformed into chaos. The crew, trained for such emergencies, sprang into action. Flight attendants rushed to calm the passengers, their voices steady despite the terror in their eyes. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, the pilots faced an intense battle to control the crippled aircraft. Mayday, mayday. British Airways 268 declaring an emergency. Captain Morgan's voice crackled over the radio, his calm tone masking the urgency of the situation. Engine 2 has failed and is on fire. We need to return to LAX immediately. The air traffic controllers on the ground scrambled to clear the skies, coordinating with other flights to make way for the distressed 747. The crew was experienced, but the situation was dire. The massive aircraft was losing altitude rapidly, and the intense heat from the flames threatened to spread to other parts of the plane. Inside the cabin, passengers clung to their seats, some in silent prayer, others clutching the hands of their loved ones. A mother hugged her child tightly, whispering comforting words amidst the chaos. An elderly couple sat with stoic expressions, holding each other as they faced the uncertain fate. Every second felt like an eternity as the plane fought to stay in the air. The fire continued to rage, and the situation grew more desperate with each passing moment. As the pilots worked frantically, the co-pilot, First Officer Harris, suggested a daring maneuver to reduce the risk of explosion. "Captain, we need to cut fuel supply to Engine 2 and attempt a steep bank to dissipate the flames," he advised. With no better options, Captain Morgan agreed. The massive 747 banked sharply, the sudden shift causing passengers to cry out, "Fear." The maneuver worked momentarily, reducing the intensity of the fire, but the engine remained a smoldering wreck, its critical components damaged beyond repair. Back on the ground, emergency services prepared for the worst. Fire trucks and ambulances lined the runway, their lights flashing ominously. The entire airport was on high alert, bracing for the possibility of a crash landing. The pilots, however, were determined to get everyone back safely. With the plane stabilized for the moment, they turned their focus to bringing the aircraft back to LAX. "Prepare for an emergency landing," Captain Morgan announced over the intercom, his voice steady. "Remain calm and follow the instructions of the crew." The passengers braced themselves, fear etched on their faces. The flight attendants moved quickly, demonstrating safety procedures and ensuring everyone was strapped in tightly. The air was thick with tension as the damaged plane descended towards the runway. The approach was harrowing. The plane wobbled precariously, the remaining engines straining to keep it level. The pilots fought against the controls, their hands steady despite the immense pressure. The runway grew larger in the windshield, a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. As they neared the ground, the pilots executed a final maneuver to align the crippled aircraft for a safe landing. With a deafening roar, the plane touched down, its tires screeching against the tarmac. Sparks flew from the damaged engine, but the pilots maintained control, guiding the aircraft down the runway. Fire trucks raced alongside, ready to douse the flames. The plane finally came to a halt, and a collective sigh of relief washed over the passengers and crew. The emergency slides deployed, and the passengers began to evacuate, their faces pale with shock, but grateful to be alive. The fire crews moved in swiftly, extinguishing the flames that had threatened to engulf the entire aircraft. The smell of smoke lingered in the air, a stark reminder of the disaster narrowly averted. In the aftermath, the passengers and crew were brought to safety, their harrowing experience quickly becoming a tale of survival and heroism. The pilots were hailed as heroes for their quick thinking and calm under pressure. The passengers, though shaken, expressed their gratitude for the crew's professionalism and courage. British Airways Flight 268's near disaster would go down in history as a testament to the resilience and bravery of those on board. It was a reminder of the thin line between life and death, and the remarkable human spirit that emerges in moments of crisis.